Before sunrise, the city felt ordinary. Streetlights flickered. Traffic lights cycled through empty intersections. Nothing suggested that within hours, everything would change. At exactly 3:47 a.m., a single encrypted signal intercepted by federal cyber units lit up a secured screen in Washington. 3 words: shipment confirmed, inland route. It was enough. Within seconds, phones rang across multiple agencies. What had been quietly building for months was about to move, and once it did, there would be no turning back. Across the Midwest, unmarked vehicles began to roll. Engines low, headlights off. Inside, agents sat in silence, their faces lit only by faint digital maps glowing in their laps. They weren't heading toward a single target. They were moving toward a network, one that had spread itself so deeply into American cities that pulling it out would feel less like an arrest and more like surgery. This wasn't just another operation. It had a name whispered only in secure rooms. Operation Silent Grid. Its objective wasn't just arrests, it was exposure. What investigators had uncovered wasn't a loose criminal group. It was a system, a structure hiding behind ordinary lives, businesses, and neighborhoods. A system that moved people, money, and power, without ever appearing on the surface. Weeks earlier, analysts had noticed something unusual. Small transactions scattered across dozens of cities, all following the same digital pattern. At first, it looked like coincidence. Then it repeated. Again and again. The numbers were small enough to avoid attention, but together they formed something massive. Millions of dollars flowing through accounts tied to businesses that barely existed. Shops with no customers. Warehouses that never opened. Companies that lived only on paper, yet moved cash daily. That was the first crack. The second came from the border. Surveillance teams tracking illegal crossings began noticing a shift. The routes were changing. The movement was too precise, too organized. Groups weren't just crossing. They were being directed, coordinated, guided through gaps as if someone already knew where enforcement wouldn't be. By the time the third signal arrived, there was no doubt left. This wasn't migration. This was logistics. At 4:02 a.m., the command center went dark. Screens switched to tactical mode. Red markers appeared across the map: Chicago, St. Louis, Indianapolis, Milwaukee, each one representing a node, a piece of the network. Each one connected. A voice broke the silence. All units, prepare to execute. Within minutes, the city streets filled with movement that most residents would never see. Convoys split into separate directions, disappearing into neighborhoods that still slept under the weight of early morning silence. Above them, helicopters cut through the sky, their presence masked by the darkness. Infrared cameras scanned rooftops, alleys, parking lots, waiting. At exactly 4:19 a.m., the first breach was initiated, a quiet suburban home. No signs of anything unusual, no noise, no movement. Then suddenly, a flash. The door gave way instantly, shattered by a controlled blast. Agents moved in with precision, clearing rooms in seconds. What they found wasn't what the house suggested. Inside, the walls were lined with equipment, communication devices, stacks of documents under false names, multiple identities for a single person. And in the basement, hidden beneath a false floor, sealed containers filled with substances that would later be confirmed as high-grade narcotics. But that was only the beginning. Across the city, another team moved on a warehouse tucked between 2 abandoned buildings. From the outside, it looked forgotten. Rusted doors, broken windows. But inside it was alive. As agents approached, movement was detected. Then gunfire, sudden, violent. The response was immediate. Within moments, the chaos ended, leaving behind silence and a discovery that changed everything. Behind stacked crates labeled as produce shipments, investigators uncovered a concealed chamber. Inside were industrial barrels, tightly sealed. When opened, they revealed thousands of pounds of illegal substances prepared for distribution, enough to flood entire regions. By sunrise, the scale of the operation was becoming clear. Dozens of locations had been hit. Hundreds of agents deployed. Arrests were being made faster than they could be processed. But the deeper investigators went, the more disturbing the picture became. This wasn't just about drugs. It wasn't just about illegal entry. It was about infrastructure. Financial records began telling their own story. Money wasn't just moving, it was being cleaned. Cycled through layers of businesses designed to appear legitimate. Auto shops, delivery companies, small retail outlets, each one a mask, each one part of something larger. And then came the names, not just suspects, not just operatives, but connections, links to individuals who weren't supposed to be part of this world. People with influence, people with reach. The kind of connections that don't just protect operations, they allow them to grow. Back at the command center, the mood shifted. This was no longer a raid. This was exposure of something embedded far deeper than anyone had expected. As the day unfolded, the public began to notice streets blocked, sirens echoing, news helicopters circling overhead. Questions spread faster than answers. What was happening? Why now? And how big was this? Officials released only fragments, enough to confirm action, but not enough to reveal the full truth. Because the truth was still unfolding in real time, by afternoon new intelligence started coming in. Messages sent just hours before the raids. Orders to shut down, to disappear, to erase. Some had tried, some had failed, but others had already moved. Which meant one thing, this wasn't over. Inside a dimly lit operations room, one analyst stared at the screen, tracking signals that were still active. Locations blinking far outside the original target zones. The network hadn't collapsed. It had shifted. A quiet voice broke the tension. They knew we were coming. And just like that, what had begun as a coordinated strike turned into something else entirely. A chase by nightfall, the city was no longer the same. What had begun in silence had erupted into a chain reaction that no one outside the operation fully understood. Streets that had woken to confusion were now filled with speculation. News channels replayed fragments of the morning. Flashes of armored agents, blurred faces, shattered doors, but none of it captured the full picture. Because the real story wasn't what had been found. It was what had slipped through. Inside the command center, the atmosphere had shifted from controlled precision to something sharper. Urgency. Screens filled with live data streams, each one updating faster than the last. Signals that should have gone dark were still active. Devices that should have been seized were moving. Fast. Whoever was behind the network hadn't just reacted. They had anticipated. Hours earlier, just before the first breach, a sequence of encrypted messages had been sent across multiple channels. At the time, they seemed routine. Now, decoded and pieced together, they told a different story. Coordinates, timings, exit routes. It wasn't panic. It was protocol. Somewhere within the system, there had been a leak. At 8:12 p.m., a new directive came through from Washington. Expand the grid. What had been a city-wide operation was now a regional pursuit. Targets extended beyond state lines, rail yards, freight terminals, logistics hubs. Places that didn't just store goods, but move them unseen. Within hours, new teams were deployed. In a quiet industrial zone outside Indianapolis, agents approached a shipping depot flagged only minutes earlier. Nothing about it stood out. Trucks parked in perfect rows, lights dimmed, no visible activity. But thermal scans told a different story. Heat signatures inside containers that should have been empty. At 9:03 p.m., they moved in. The containers weren't carrying what the labels claimed. Behind sealed metal doors, agents discovered tightly packed crates filled with weapon components, disassembled, carefully wrapped, and ready to be reassembled anywhere they were needed. Not just pistols, not just rifles, military-grade equipment, enough to arm groups far beyond the scope of street-level crime. Back in Chicago, another breakthrough was unfolding. Financial analysts had finally cracked a segment of the network's transaction chain. What looked like random deposits began forming patterns. Paths that led not just across states, but across borders. Offshore accounts, digital wallets, shell corporations layered so deeply they almost erased their own origin. Almost one name surfaced repeatedly. Not an individual, but an entity. A company that didn't exist in any physical sense, yet appeared everywhere in the data. It acted as a bridge, a central artery moving money between operations, and tracing it back led to a location no one in the room expected, not a cartel stronghold, not a hidden compound, an office building, clean, modern, legitimate. The realization settled in slowly. This network hadn't just hidden in the shadows, it had built itself into the system. Right in plain sight, as midnight approached, exhaustion began to creep into the operation. Agents who had been moving for nearly 20 hours straight now worked on instinct. Coffee sat untouched, conversations were shorter, sharper. Every decision carried weight. Then another alert hit. Multiple signals, all at once, lighting up across Missouri and Wisconsin. Movement, coordinated and deliberate. Vehicles leaving known zones. Devices reconnecting after hours of silence. It wasn't random, they were regrouping. A senior officer leaned over the central display, eyes locked on the shifting map. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, quietly, almost under his breath, he said what everyone was already thinking. This was never Phase 1. What they had dismantled that morning wasn't the operation. It was a layer. The real structure was still intact, still moving, still adapting. At 2:27 a.m., less than 24 hours after the first convoy rolled out, a second wave was authorized. This time, there would be no element of surprise. The network was alert now, defensive, possibly desperate, and that made it more dangerous than before. In a rail yard outside Milwaukee, agents intercepted a freight train flagged by the latest intelligence. It had originated hundreds of miles away, passed through multiple checkpoints, and raised no suspicion. Until now, when they forced entry into one of the cargo units, what they found confirmed the worst fears: Sioux walls, hidden compartments, and inside them, sealed packages marked with codes that matched earlier discoveries. Drugs, weapons, cash, all moving together, all part of the same system. But there was something else, a document, small, almost overlooked, printed, not digital, a list of locations, future points. Cities that hadn't yet appeared in any investigation. This wasn't just a network reacting, it was planning ahead. Back at headquarters, the room fell into a heavy silence as the implications became clear. Even after everything that had been uncovered, they were still only seeing part of it. By the following morning, official statements painted a controlled picture. Dozens of arrests, millions in assets seized, major disruption of organized crime. On paper, it was a success, but inside the operation, no one used that word because success would mean it was over, and it wasn't. Across multiple states, signals continued to flicker on and off, fragments of communication slipping through before disappearing again. Like something breathing just beneath the surface. Watching. Waiting communities began to feel the aftershocks. Some saw relief, fewer incidents, quieter streets. Others felt uncertainty, questions that didn't have clear answers, what had really been happening, and how much of it was still out there. In the days that followed, one phrase began circulating quietly among those closest to the investigation. Not an operation, a doctrine, because what had been uncovered wasn't just a single threat. It was a model, a way of operating that could rebuild itself faster than it could be destroyed. Weeks later, as reports continued to come in, one final update was added to the internal file. No headlines, no press release. Just a single line entered into the system. Network active. Evolution confirmed. And somewhere beyond the maps, beyond the raids, beyond the headlines, the system adjusted once again. Not gone, just harder to see.